Welcome to Spotlight Murder by Skoob. I'm your host, Kieran Caldwell, and today we're diving into one of Hollywood's most heartbreaking tragedies, a story that combines the glamour of 1980s entertainment with the brutal reality of domestic violence. This is the story of Dominique Dunne, a rising star whose bright future was extinguished at just 22 years old. Picture Santa Monica, California, November 23, 1959. A baby girl is born into what can only be described as Hollywood aristocracy. Dominique Ellen Dunne enters a world where creativity flows like water, and celebrity encounters are as common as morning coffee. Her father, Dominique Dunne, was a powerhouse in the entertainment industry, a writer, producer, and actor who would later become one of America's most recognizable crime journalists. Her mother, Ellen Griffin Dunne, known affectionately as Lenny, came from Arizona ranching stock, bringing a different kind of strength to this creative dynasty. But here's what makes this family truly remarkable. It wasn't just her immediate family making waves in Hollywood. Her older brother Griffin would become a successful actor and director. Her extended family tree reads like a who's who of American literature. Writers John Gregory Dunne and Joan Didion were her uncle and aunt. When your godmother is Marie Cooper, Gary Cooper's daughter, you know you're born into entertainment royalty. Growing up in Beverly Hills, Dominique was surrounded by movie stars as naturally as other children might be surrounded by neighbors. But don't think this privilege made life perfect. The Dunne family carried its share of tragedy. Dominique had two sisters who died within a week of their birth, casting early shadows over what appeared to be a charmed existence. When Dominique was just 11, her parents' marriage crumbled under the pressures of Hollywood excess. Her father's obsession with career advancement and the typical Hollywood party lifestyle of the 1960s drove a wedge between her parents that couldn't be repaired. Then, when Dominique turned 16, her mother received a devastating diagnosis: multiple sclerosis, a progressive disease that would eventually confine her to a wheelchair. Yet through all these challenges, young Dominique emerged as a confident, driven individual. Her brother Griffin would later say she seemed to know exactly who she was from the age of 4 or 5, a rare quality that combined ambition with genuine joy for life. Despite having every Hollywood door potentially open to her through family connections, Dominique Dunne chose to earn her stripes the hard way. After attending prestigious schools, including Harvard Westlake and the Taft School, she made a decision that would shape her character. She was going to make it on her own merit. Her educational journey took her across continents. She spent a transformative year in Florence, Italy, where she studied art at the Michelangelo Buonarroti School and the British Institute. This wasn't just academic tourism. She became fluent in Italian and immersed herself in Renaissance culture, developing the sophisticated artistic sensibility that would later inform her acting. Returning to the United States with newfound worldliness, Dominique knew exactly what she wanted: to join the ranks of her idols, Julie Andrews, Jane Fonda, and Natalie Wood. She enrolled in the University of Colorado to study acting, but the pull of professional opportunity proved stronger than academic completion. Her first break came in 1979 with a small role in the television film Diary of a Teenage Hitchhiker. It was hardly glamorous, but it showcased something special, a natural screen presence that casting directors remembered. This led to guest appearances on some of television's most popular shows: Family, Lou Grant, Heart to Heart, and CHIPS. But 1982 would change everything. Steven Spielberg was producing a supernatural thriller called Poltergeist, and they needed a teenage daughter for the terrorized Freeling family. Dominique auditioned and landed the role of Dana Freeling, the teenage daughter who becomes part of one of the most iconic horror films of the 1980s. Poltergeist wasn't just a box office hit, it was a cultural phenomenon. The film's blend of suburban normalcy and supernatural terror struck a chord with audiences, and Dominique's performance as the skeptical older daughter earned widespread praise. For a young actress, this was the golden ticket. the kind of breakout role that launches decades-long careers. As the film headed into post-production, Dominique continued building her resume with appearances on Hill Street Blues and other prestigious television productions. Industry insiders were taking notice. Here was a young woman with the perfect combination of natural talent, family connections, and professional work ethic. Her future seemed limitless. But success in Hollywood often comes with unexpected dangers. And for Dominique, the greatest threat wouldn't come from the competitive entertainment industry. It would come from her personal life. In the summer of 1981, at what should have been the peak of her happiness, Dominique met John Thomas Sweeney at a party. On the surface, he seemed charming enough, a sous chef at Ma Maison, one of Los Angeles' most exclusive restaurants. But beneath that charming exterior lurked a history that would have terrified anyone who knew its full extent. John Sweeney was born October 12, 1956, into a household defined by violence. His childhood was a nightmare of alcoholism and domestic abuse, with his father regularly beating his mother while the children watched helplessly. During his eventual sentencing hearing, his own family would testify about the terror that shaped his early years. His mother would plead, "John is a victim of violence," as if his traumatic past could somehow excuse what he would later become. Unlike Dominique's world of Hollywood glamour, Sweeney's background was working-class struggle. He found his calling in restaurant kitchens, working his way up to become a skilled chef. Ma Maison wasn't just any restaurant. It was where Hollywood power players made deals over expensive wine and perfectly prepared meals. It was exactly the kind of place where a young actress might meet a charismatic chef. The attraction was immediate and intense. Within weeks of meeting, Dominique and Sweeney were living together in a small house on Rangeley Avenue in West Hollywood. Friends described the early days as passionate and romantic. Sweeney could be charming and attentive when he wanted to be. But the warning signs appeared almost immediately. Sweeney's charm had a dark flip side: jealousy, possessiveness, and an explosive temper. What started as romantic intensity quickly became something much more sinister, controlling behavior that isolated Dominique from friends and left her walking on eggshells. The violence escalated gradually, as it often does in abusive relationships. First came the psychological control, monitoring her activities, questioning her friendships, making her feel guilty for pursuing her career. Then came the physical abuse. In late August 1982, during what witnesses described as a particularly vicious argument, Sweeney grabbed large handfuls of Dominique's hair and literally pulled them from her scalp. The attack was so violent that she fled to her mother's home in terror, only to return days later, a pattern tragically common in domestic violence situations. But Sweeney's violence wasn't limited to Dominique. During the trial that would follow, prosecutors revealed that an earlier girlfriend, Lillian Pierce, had been beaten by Sweeney on 10 separate occasions and hospitalized twice. This was a man with an established pattern of using violence to control the women in his life. The most chilling incident occurred in September 1982, just weeks before Dominique's murder. During an argument, Sweeney grabbed her by the throat and threw her to the floor. A friend who witnessed the attack later testified to hearing loud gagging sounds before Dominique managed to escape. In a scene that sounds like something from a thriller movie, she ran to her car with Sweeney actually jumping on the hood, trying to prevent her escape. That dramatic escape finally convinced Dominique that the relationship was not just unhealthy, it was deadly. She ended things definitively and changed the locks on their shared house, determined to move forward with her life and career. But for John Sweeney, rejection was unacceptable. His obsession with Dominique would lead to the most tragic night in Hollywood crime history. October 30th, 1982. It was supposed to be just another evening of professional preparation for Dominique. She was at her West Hollywood home on Rangeley Avenue, working on lines for her upcoming role in the television miniseries, V, with her friend and fellow actor David Packer. After the success of Poltergeist, This new project represented another step forward in her promising career. The evening started normally. Dominique and Packer were in the living room, running through scenes, when she took a break to chat on the phone with another friend. But suddenly, the conversation took an ominous turn. Dominique's voice changed, filled with dread. "Oh God, it's Sweeney! Let me get him off the phone!" Somehow, her violent ex-boyfriend had managed to break into their phone conversation through the switchboard. It was a violation that sent immediate chills through both Dominique and Packer. If Sweeney was monitoring her calls, what else was he capable of? They didn't have to wait long to find out. About 10 minutes later, John Sweeney appeared at Dominique's front door, uninvited and unwelcome. He had been drinking martinis at the Ma Maison bar earlier and walked to her house, a journey that would end in unthinkable tragedy. Dominique made a fateful decision. Rather than call the police or refuse to see him, she told Packer she would go outside to talk with Sweeney briefly, hoping to keep the encounter calm and get him to leave. She stepped onto the porch while Packer remained inside, not knowing he was about to become the key witness to a murder. What started as conversation quickly escalated into heated argument. From inside the house, Packer heard the unmistakable sounds of violence, loud smacking noises, followed by two sharp, terrifying screams, and then a sickening thud from the direction of the driveway. Packer's immediate instinct was to call for help, but the first dispatcher he reached delivered crushing news. The Rangeley Avenue address was outside their jurisdiction. Precious minutes were ticking away as he frantically called another friend, saying words that would haunt him forever. "If I die tonight, John Sweeney did it." Terrified, but knowing he had to help Dominique, Packer left the house through the back door and crept around to the driveway. What he saw there would be burned into his memory forever. John Sweeney kneeling over Dominique's motionless body, not fleeing or hiding, but calmly waiting. "Call the police," Sweeney told him, with the eerie calm of someone who had already accepted what he'd done. When officers arrived just minutes later, they found a scene that defied the usual chaos of violent crime. Sweeney stood in the driveway with his hands raised, and without prompting, made a confession that would become central to the case. "I killed my girlfriend and I tried to kill myself." Dominique lay unconscious on the driveway, not breathing, with no detectable pulse. The strangulation had been so severe that her brain was already suffering from oxygen deprivation. Paramedics worked desperately to revive her, managing to restart her heart, but the damage was already catastrophic. As Sweeney was taken into custody, he continued making statements that revealed the calculated nature of his violence. "I didn't think I choked her that hard," he reportedly said. "I just kept on choking her. I blew it." These weren't the words of someone who had acted in a moment of passion. They were the reflections of a man who had deliberately strangled another human being. At Cedars-Sinai Medical Center, doctors fought to save Dominique's life, but the medical reality was grim. The sustained strangulation had caused irreversible brain damage. For 5 agonizing days, her family maintained hope while machines kept her body functioning, but brain scans showed no activity. On November 4th, 1982, Dominique's parents made the most heartbreaking decision any parent can face. They agreed to remove their daughter from life support. At just 22 years old, with her whole career ahead of her, Dominique Dunne was pronounced dead. John Sweeney had taken more than just a life. He had stolen decades of performances that would never be given, roles that would never be played, and a family's future happiness. The promising young woman who had graced movie screens in Poltergeist was gone, leaving only memories and the devastating question of what might have been. The trial of John Thomas Sweeney became one of the most controversial and emotionally charged legal proceedings of the 1980s. What should have been a straightforward murder case instead became a masterclass in how the justice system could fail victims of domestic violence. Sweeney was initially charged with first-degree murder, which could have meant 25 years to life in prison. But his defense team, led by skilled attorneys who understood how to manipulate the legal system, immediately began working to reduce the charges. They argued that Sweeney hadn't planned to kill Dominique, that he had acted in the heat of passion during a sudden argument. The prosecution, led by Deputy District Attorney Stephen Barshop, faced an uphill battle from the start. They wanted to present evidence of Sweeney's history of violence against women, including testimony from his former girlfriend, Lillian Pierce, who had been hospitalized twice after beatings from Sweeney. This evidence would have shown the jury that Dominique's murder wasn't an isolated incident, but part of a pattern of escalating violence. But in a decision that would prove crucial, the judge ruled that much of this evidence was inadmissible. The jury would hear about Sweeney's troubled childhood and his claims of trying to kill himself after murdering Dominique, but they wouldn't hear the full truth about his history of battering women. During the trial, prosecutors presented compelling evidence of premeditation. The medical examiner testified that Dominique had been strangled for 3 to 5 minutes, an eternity when you're squeezing the life out of another human being. Barshop held up photographs of Dominique's bruised neck and told the jury, "Look what you did to this girl for absolutely nothing." The prosecution argued that no one accidentally strangles someone for that long. This wasn't a momentary loss of control. It was a sustained, deliberate act of murder. But Sweeney's defense painted a different picture. They portrayed him as a victim of his own abusive childhood, a man who had loved Dominique but couldn't control his emotions when faced with rejection. They claimed he had tried to commit suicide after killing her, though investigators found no credible evidence of this supposed attempt. After 8 days of deliberation, on September 21st, 1983, the jury delivered their verdict: not guilty of murder, but guilty of voluntary manslaughter. The courtroom erupted in gasps of disbelief. Judge Burton S. Katz was visibly frustrated with the verdict. He called the killing pure and simple murder and said Sweeney's actions showed malice, not momentary passion. "This defendant's ego was bruised by the rejection," the judge said. "His response was to hurt, permanently and irreversibly, the person who had rejected him." Dominique's father, Dominique Dunne, stood up in court and shouted, "Not for our family, Judge Katz." The family was devastated. They had watched the legal system minimize their daughter's murder, turning it into something less than what they knew it to be. Several jurors later admitted they might have convicted Sweeney of murder if they had been allowed to hear about his history of violence against other women. The very evidence that might have secured justice for Dominique had been kept from the people who needed to hear it most. On November 7th, 1983, Sweeney was sentenced to 6.5 years in prison, the maximum allowed for voluntary manslaughter, but still far less than a murder conviction would have brought. With credit for time served and the possibility of early parole for good behavior, legal experts predicted he might serve as little as 2.5 years. One prosecutor grimly noted that Sweeney might be out just in time to cook somebody dinner and kill somebody else, a prophetic comment that highlighted how inadequate the sentence truly was. The public was outraged. Victims' rights groups, including one started by actress Teresa Saldana, protested outside the courthouse. But their anger couldn't change the verdict or the sentence. True to predictions, Sweeney was released on parole in June 1986, after serving just 2 years and 9 months of his 6.5-year sentence. He promptly returned to Los Angeles and attempted to resume his career as a chef, as if nothing had happened. But Dominique's family wasn't finished fighting for justice. When they learned Sweeney had been hired as head chef at a Santa Monica restaurant, Griffin Dunne and his mother began protesting outside the establishment, handing out flyers that read, "The food you will eat tonight was cooked by the hands that killed Dominique Dunne." Their campaign worked. Sweeney quit his job and left Los Angeles, but the damage to the family's faith in justice had been done. They had learned the hard way that in 1980s America, a young woman's life could be taken by her abuser, and the legal system would treat it as something less than murder. The aftermath of Dominique's murder and the trial's disappointing outcome created ripples that extended far beyond one family's grief. The Dunnes transformed their pain into a force for change. each family member channeling their loss in ways that would impact thousands of others. Ellen Lenny Dunne, despite her battle with multiple sclerosis, became a fierce advocate for victims' rights. In 1983, she founded Justice for Homicide Victims, an organization dedicated to supporting families who had lost loved ones to violent crime. She understood firsthand how the legal system could fail victims and their families, and she was determined that others wouldn't face that battle alone. Through her organization, Ellen provided resources, emotional support, and practical guidance to families navigating the complex world of criminal justice. She pushed for legislative changes that would give victims' families more rights in the legal process and ensure that evidence of domestic violence history could be presented in court. Her work continued until her death in 1997, leaving behind a legacy of advocacy that helped countless families find their voice in the system. Dominique Dunne's transformation was perhaps the most visible. The grief-stricken father channeled his rage and sorrow into becoming one of America's most recognized crime journalists. He began by writing about his own experience, publishing Justice: A Father's Account of the Trial of His Daughter's Killer in Vanity Fair in 1984. The article was raw, honest, and devastating in its portrayal of how the justice system had failed his family. This piece launched Dominique into a new career that would define the rest of his life. He became Vanity Fair's go-to writer for high-profile criminal cases, covering the Menendez brothers' trial, the O.J. Simpson case, and countless other stories where privilege and crime intersected. His writing was deeply personal, informed by his own experience as a victim's family member, and it gave readers an insider's perspective on how the wealthy and powerful often escaped true consequences for their actions. Dominique also began hiring private investigators to track Sweeney after his release from prison, driven by a need to ensure he couldn't hurt another woman. But eventually, he realized this obsession was consuming him and chose to stop, saying it was better for his own peace of mind not to know where Sweeney was living. Griffin Dunne, who was building his own successful career as an actor and director, became the family's voice for keeping Dominique's memory alive. He spoke publicly about his sister, sharing memories of her confidence and determination, while also addressing the ongoing impact of domestic violence. In 2024, he published The Friday Afternoon Club, a family memoir, which includes touching remembrances of Dominique and frank discussions about how her murder shaped their family forever. But what happened to John Sweeney after his release? This question haunted the Dunne family and many who had followed the case. Initially, he returned to Los Angeles and tried to resume his culinary career, but the family's protests made that impossible. He eventually left California and reportedly changed his name to John Mora, attempting to escape the infamy of his crime. Over the years, there were scattered reports of Sweeney living in various locations, working in restaurant kitchens under his assumed name. In one incident in the 1990s, Dominique Dunne learned that a man named John Sweeney had become engaged to a woman in Florida. When investigation confirmed it was the same person, Griffin contacted the woman to warn her about Sweeney's history. The engagement was reportedly called off. Today, Sweeney is believed to be alive and living somewhere in the Pacific Northwest, still working in the food service industry under his assumed identity. He served less than 3 years for taking a young woman's life and has now lived more years as a free man after the murder than Dominique lived in her entire life. The contrast is stark and painful. Dominique, who had everything to live for, was dead at 22. Sweeney, who took her life in a fit of rage and control, has lived decades beyond that night, free to pursue whatever life he chooses under his new identity. Dominique's story became a touchstone for discussions about domestic violence, the justice system's treatment of women victims, and the inadequacy of legal protections for those trying to escape abusive relationships. Her case highlighted how even women with resources, family support, and public attention could be failed by a system that too often minimized violence against women. The changes that followed in how domestic violence cases are prosecuted, in the admissibility of evidence about patterns of abuse, in support services for victims, can be traced partly to cases like Dominique's, where the injustice was so clear that it demanded reform. But perhaps the most important legacy is simply remembering Dominique herself, not just as a victim, but as a talented young woman who brought joy to those around her and had so much more to give the world. In Poltergeist, audiences got a glimpse of what she might have become: confident, natural, compelling on screen. We can only imagine the performances we never got to see, the roles that remained unplayed, the artistic contributions that were stolen along with her life. As this story ends, the questions linger. How does someone serve just a few years for taking a life? How does justice fail so completely when the victim can no longer speak? Dominique Dunne wasn't just a tragedy. She was a future stolen. A young actress with rare presence, quiet confidence, and a career just beginning to unfold. Poltergeist showed the star she was becoming, and the one the world never got to see. But Dominique's legacy didn't end with her death. Her case reshaped conversations around domestic violence, victims' rights, and the dangerous illusion of private abuse. Her family turned unimaginable grief into advocacy, ensuring her voice would echo long after the headlines faded. Yet one haunting truth remains: how many lives are still at risk, slipping through the same cracks? If you want to explore the unanswered questions, the hidden failures, and the impact this case had behind closed doors, there's more to uncover. Download the Skoob app now to get access to the full story. This has been Hollywood True Crime, because every victim is more than a headline, and every story deserves to be fully told.